Hello, I'm Anthony. I'm in the process of reworking an old song of mine. This is a song I wrote 4 or 5 years ago called Evermore. And occasionally I like to dip back into my old songs to see if there's any way that I can reinvigorate them or improve upon them in some way. And it's generally in terms of production that I look to make the improvements. I was listening to the bass track on this song and I decided I wanted to add some saturation to it. And sure enough, a couple of hours later, I found myself in a rabbit hole. So I'm going to take you down that rabbit hole with me today. We're going to have a fairly detailed look at what we mean when we say applying saturation to a sound. Now, if you push saturation far enough, you end up in distortion, which is simply a single flavor of saturation. What I'm talking about today, though, is a softer form of saturation where I'm adding some harmonics to a sound to enhance or improve it in some sense of the context of the song. So without further ado, let's study that context. Today we're going to concentrate on the first 8 bars of the bass line of this song. I'm just going to play the first 4 bars of it now to give you some idea of what we're talking about. As things stand right now, there's no saturation on this. This is the track as it was originally produced. So I identified 2 issues that I wanted to address with that bass sound. The first was that it was a little bit too dynamic. I wanted to compress it a little bit. Now I do already have a compressor on this bass track, but I decided to approach the problem from the perspective of a saturator because some forms of saturation, and we're going to have a look at them today, naturally compress the sound. The second is that I just want to dirty the sound up a little bit. It's a little bit too soft and gentle, and I want to add a bit of grit. So those are the 2 kind of aims that I'm going for. Let's see how we can approach it. I'm going to use 2 different plugins today, the Soundtoys Decapitator and the Neold Big Al. We're going to start off today with the Decapitator. Now, Decapitator has 5 different saturation modes, these buttons. We're going to have a look at all 5 of them today. But we start off in A mode, which is the Ampex 350 tape saturator. So this is effectively emulating sending the signal onto tape, onto an Ampex 350 tape machine. Now, anybody who loves 60s and 70s music will probably agree with me that everything recorded on tape sounds better than everything that was recorded subsequently. Most of my favourite albums were recorded on tape, and part of the reason for the ongoing love affair with tape is that it naturally compresses and saturates the sound simultaneously. We're going to go into forensic mode fairly soon, and we're going to start dealing with sine waves and looking at exactly what's going on. But just as a very quick demo, I'm going to solo the bass, get it running without any saturation, bring the saturation in, and you'll very easily hear what's going on. So you can hear that extra grit that's being introduced. I've got fairly gentle drive here, so it's adding a little bit of saturation, a little bit of distortion to the sound, but it's not violent. We've not got like a heavy metal distortion sound going on here. The reason why the insight meters are here are to show that we're getting that compression as well, and you can see that from the true peak value. If we get it running again, the true peak on the output. So this is basically before we hit the saturator. After we go into the saturator, the true peak coming out of the saturator is lower because the entire sound has been compressed, and so we're not getting there's about 2 dB worth of extra peak that's being chopped off by this natural compression. That was one of my goals, to just get this bass sound a little bit more under control, to cut off some of those high peaks. We're also seeing from the composite outputs, I try to keep them within 1 dB, so whatever the plugin is doing in between, you can see I'm very slightly out there, but generally 1 dB of volume difference is not significant enough for us to really be able to get polluted with our loudness bias. So we're really just hearing the quality of the thing itself. Now, very often applying distortion, particularly to things like bass, make it sound worse when soloed than the natural sound. So you always have to make sure to go back to the mix to hear it in the context of the song. We'll have another quick listen to that. But also we're trying to identify if A, have the volumes being controlled with that bit of compression, and B, is it just popping through a little bit more, those extra harmonics that are being introduced? Are they helping us to hear the sound better? Not necessarily more clearly because it's being distorted, but is it poking through the mix just a little bit better? And my judgment in both of those cases is yes, it's designed and intended to be subtle, but to my ears there is clearly an improvement. What I want to do at this point, however, is get medieval on this stuff. I want to figure out really what's going on. So I've set up a test harness here. We have an instance of Hallion generating a simple sine tone and an instance of decapitator that we can send that sine tone through to see exactly what it's doing. So I'll get the thing running, and having heard the sine tone, we don't really need to hear that very much more. I'll bring it up every now and again when I bring the distortion in. So here's our sine tone, 130.81 Hertz, perfect, middle C. Thanks very much, Hallion. Hallion does everything absolutely perfectly. Here's our oscilloscope representing the sine wave, obviously volume balanced. Now we bring in the decapitator. This is what it's doing. It's adding all of these extra harmonics. It's really difficult to actually tell that there's very much change to the tone. But that doesn't matter. There is. All of these extra harmonics have been brought in on something as simple as a sine wave. You're not really going to be able to tell sonically what's going on, but it's a great demonstration for exactly what's happening behind the scenes, because we're adding integer multiples of the fundamental, and the relative amplitude of all of these harmonics is what's going to define the characteristics of that particular kind of saturation. This is tape saturation, one of the three kind of fundamental types of saturation: tape, transistor, and tube. And one of the primary characteristics of tape saturation is that odd order harmonics are enhanced. Now, if I crank up the volume, if I push this drive all the way to 10, this will sound very gritty if I turn it up now, because we've turned it almost into a square wave. You can see in the oscilloscope, we're really pushing the odd order harmonics. That's basically what a square wave is. It's only odd harmonics. But we started with a sine wave, so the even harmonics are popping through. You can see them, they're still kind of there, but the odd harmonics are the ones that are being pushed. That's one of the characteristics of tape saturation. Now, it's very easy to get carried away with the distinction between odd harmonics and even harmonics. They are significant, but it's not the be-all and end-all of the story. It's much more important how the device is actually constructed and what's going on inside the circuitry. So we've got two different metrics to consider here. Firstly, we're pushing odd order harmonics. Well, what can we infer from that? Well, generally speaking, odd harmonics are more dissonant than even harmonics. And the reason for that is pretty straightforward. If we have a look at the harmonic series, and it takes a little bit of work to actually understand what I've put in the spreadsheet here, but this is the harmonic series starting from our C, going up in integer multiples, the first 21 harmonics of the series. What I've put in column C here is a representation of the ratio with some sort of respect to the fundamental. So the second harmonic, for instance, is exactly double the fundamental, which is an octave. But we then apply an important step when we're looking at the series. We create kind of like a bass camp. If you treat these yellow bars as harmonic bass camps, as soon as we reach a new octave or perfect power of 2 multiple from the fundamental, we say this is our new fundamental. To all intents and purposes, we're going to treat 261.62 as our new fundamental, so that when we have a look at the next harmonic, we can very easily see that there's a 3:2 ratio between those two numbers. In other words, we treat the third harmonic as if it's a perfect fifth. Even though it's 3 times the actual fundamental, that's really not the significant thing. It's 1.5 times the nearest close, kind of inverted quotes, fundamental. And we carry on going up the series in those terms. So the fourth harmonic is another octave, another perfect power of 2 multiple from the fundamental. That generates our new bass camp. And then the next few harmonics we go up, we're treating as ratios from this bass camp. So we have a major third here, a perfect fifth, and the seventh harmonic is the first one that's a little bit awkward because it doesn't mathematically fit perfectly. This 1.75 ratio here is fairly close to a -7, which would be 1.777, but it's not actually a perfect ratio, and so we're just starting to get a little bit dodgy. The seventh harmonic is a bit dodgy. The eighth harmonic is great, that's an octave, generates our new bass camp, and we go on up like this. The reason why we're doing this is we're trying to determine whether or not there's any difference between even harmonics and odd harmonics, and there absolutely is. Even harmonics are stronger. Even. So we've got all the way up to the 10th even harmonic here, and we've only dealt in octaves, perfect fifths, and major thirds, the three most harmonically consonant tones that we hear. From that point onwards, things start going pear-shaped pretty quickly. The 11th harmonic is a weak perfect fourth. Then the even harmonic carries on knocking it out of the park with a perfect fifth. Poor old odd harmonics are falling way behind here. We're becoming increasingly dissonant. So if you're introducing a series of harmonics based on these mathematical principles, and don't forget the universe wins as far as the harmonic series is concerned, our ears are designed to pick up on this stuff, it's important. The even numbers are crushing the odd numbers, it's not close. And so if you have a saturator that's enhancing even harmonics, it's going to sound more consonant. So that's your first set of principles. But on top of that, you've got a second thing to think about as well, which is the actual circuitry of the thing itself. What we're dealing with here is analog tape, a very organic process. And what actually happens in reality is that even though it's generally accentuating the odd harmonics, it's strangely doing it in a more consonant way. And it's all to do with the ratio of the differences between these harmonics. We like these lovely, pretty patterns. Can you see how smooth and gentle those patterns are? So even though it's pushing that dissonance, it's bizarrely doing it in a consonant way. And so we like the sound of tape saturation. Our ears pick up these beautiful mathematical shapes. One final thing I'm going to point out very briefly before we move on, and it's not directly related to our discussion now, but stick it in the can for 10 minutes time. With the exception of the 7th harmonic, everything up to 10 is consonant and harmonically strong. Octaves, perfect fifths, major thirds, major second is completely fine. There's nothing wrong with a major second. E minor add 9 is a gorgeous chord. You know, there's lots of harmonically beautiful content there. All of these first 10 harmonics are really strong. And so the comparison between even and odd isn't much use for the first 10 harmonics. We only start depending on it more when we step past the 10th, where the disparity between even and odd becomes much more significant. I've just this moment realised that this video is going to take quite a while. We're going full nerd. I'm not going to cut corners. I want to talk about this stuff. It's sufficiently interesting. So buckle yourselves in. We're going to be here a while. Now I'm going to jump over E for a moment because a couple of the other settings are better kind of general use case illustrations. I want to have a look at the third option next. So this is based on the Neve 1057 preamp, a germanium transistor based preamp. And transistor preamps, just like tape machines, accentuate odd harmonics. And this one is really easy to see. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Very, very clear illustration. You can also see in the oscilloscope a pretty brutal square wave. This is quite brash, pretty harsh saturator. And of the 5 options, N and P are the most brutal, the most brash. We'll get to P in a moment. The third emulation we're looking at is the Culture Vulture triode mode. So these two settings at the end, T and P, are both Culture Vulture settings, but this device has 2 different means of operation, triode and pentode, and they're basically different valve amps. So this is a tube saturator, and in T mode, it's accentuating even harmonics. 2, 4, 6. Not so much 8, bit of a weak one, that one, but 10 is pushed. So even harmonics are going to generate a softer, more consonant type of saturation. Because we've introduced the 3 fundamental types of distortion at this point, I want to jump back to the bass line and have a listen to each of those in turn. We'll start with the tape saturator. transistor, much more fizzy, and tube, the softest of the three. I tried bringing the entire song in then and it was way too loud, so I had to stop, reset my volumes. Let's listen to it in the context of the song now. Might as well start here with the tube. Transistor. Much too distorted, I don't want that. Now, tape's pretty good. It's sounding quite nice. But when compared with the tube distortion, and I A-B'd these backwards and forwards a little bit, that tube distortion is the softest and it's doing the best job for me. It's compressing the signal nicely, but it's not really introducing any overt distortion. I've got the drive set quite low. It's quite a subtle effect, but it's doing exactly what I want it to. At this point, we're going to have a very brief look at the other two settings just to finish the story. E stands for EMI. This is another transistor console emulation. But in the case of this particular emulation, it's not quite so clearly evident what's going on with the harmonic distribution. You can see there's less order to it. It's really quite chaotic. Now, when you're introducing both odd and even harmonics simultaneously like this, what you're really doing is you're taking away the discussion about the odd or even harmonic business. This is largely more in the territory of noise. This is quite a chaotic sound. And when I turn it up, you can hear that's really pretty harsh. It's quite a raspy saturation. Certainly the most violent of the four that we've heard so far. That's a characteristic of that particular console. You can never underestimate the importance of the components themselves, and this is an illustration of those components being a significant player. Yes, granted, it's a transistor circuit, but there's much more going on than that. We can't simply reduce all of this stuff to black and white. Similarly, with the pentode mode of the Culture Vulture, we also get a similarly chaotic view and therefore a pretty harsh distortion. You can see there's really very little we can infer from the frequency distribution from the sine wave. And when we then go over to the bass line and we listen to that in context, we can come to similar conclusions. The E and the P sound pretty raspy, pretty harsh. Because the fundamental characteristics of those two saturation units are more than I want for this particular case, they're going to fall out of the running at this point. But by looking at those 5 different emulation models, we've learned a lot. We've learned that even harmonics is the softest, gentlest sound there is, that odd harmonics can sound gentle if they're generated in some consistent or identifiable pattern. Odd harmonics, particularly above the 10th harmonic, are the ones that have the greater dissonance. And finally, if you throw away all rules about odd and even and you just have effectively a chaotic mash of overtones, then we're really reliant on what is it, what's the piece of kit that we're looking at. That's now the primary consideration. So up until this point, I've got 2 candidates, the tape saturator and the triode mode of the tube saturator. Now it's time to take a look at the second plugin, the Neold Big Al. This comes from the Plugin Alliance package. Plugin Alliance, I don't normally talk about the commercial side of like plugin bundles, but Plugin Alliance is basically a subscription service. You rent the entire package for a year, and at the end of that year or any time during that year, you can choose a number of plugins to own permanently. So occasionally I'll dip into the Plugin Alliance, sign up for a year, and then cherry pick which plugins I'm going to keep. This is one of the ones that I chose the last time I subscribed to the package. To buy this thing outright, it's like $250. You don't want to do that. Sign up to one of the mega bundles, just for a year, and then choose this as one. And it can cost you as little as $99 if you can find it in a sale. I think standard price for the lowest bundle is $150, but I absolutely love this thing. It just sounds so warm. Now I'm going to send it through the sine tone generator. Let's have a look. These are my preferred settings. So when I dial this thing in by ear, these are the settings I use more often than not for the saturator. And this is why I drew your attention to the fact that those 10 first harmonics in the series are the most important. Because when I have this thing dialed in to the point where I'm really liking its sound, it's only actually generating 7 overtones. Got the fundamental plus 7 extra harmonics, and there's nothing beyond. Now this is a very simplistic sound. I appreciate I'm dealing with a sine wave here. So you have to be a little bit careful about the extrapolations that you make, but it's patently obvious that this plugin is not assigning frequencies right the way up the range in the way that all of the 5 standard presets out of Decapitator did. I would have had to apply high cut. You know, I would explicitly need to do something to Decapitator to get it to this stage. This is Big Al's default position. It only concentrates on the lower order harmonics, and they're all consonant. Well, the awkward 7th harmonic. Let's have a look at what's going on with that 7th harmonic, shall we? This one here is the slightly naughty one because it's a weak minor 7. It's not a particularly consonant harmonic as far as our kind of equal temperament based ears are concerned. The rest of them are all absolutely fine. The reason I mentioned this is because the Big Al is fundamentally pentode tube amplifier. Pentode tube amplifiers accentuate odd harmonics. If I push this too far, you can see that it's pushing the odd harmonics. So this is supposed to be sounding dissonant, and in fact at this stage it does. Past the magic 42 value on this drive knob, it starts doing stuff that I'm not that fond of. You know, that's not where its sweet spot is concerned. I'm going to bring the bass guitar in a minute, don't worry. But just to show you the illustration of how stark the difference is between the lower order harmonics and the higher order harmonics, that's yet another thing to feed into your decision-making process when you're deciding what you want these things to sound like. So here we are back on the bass line. Got it muted at the moment. I'll bring it in after we've heard a bar or so of the bass line on its own. This is still volume matched, by the way. More or less. Now, in the context of the song, has it done the 2 jobs that I needed of it? Is it controlling the transients? I have a lower true peak here. Is it helping push through those extra few harmonics, just 7 overtones? Are they doing the job? Are they making this bass sound better than without it? Listen to those particularly 2 notes who are going thud, thud. They're popping through a little bit too much. That's one of the things that I'm looking to control. And then on the higher register notes, I'm just looking for a little bit more colour, a little bit more interest. It's gently superior, very slightly better than without it being there, and that's all I ask. I'm not asking for dramatic effect here. I don't want massive distortion. I just want it to be very slightly pushed. Sounds good solo, doesn't it? That's always the case. But those extra gritty overtones, when in the context of the song, That's exactly what I'm looking for. Now, whether or not I choose to use the Big Al or the triode mode of the decapitator, those are the two that are really duking it out. Do I want that pure, even harmonic goodness that you're going to get from the triode tube amp? That sounds wonderful. That's my favourite of the 5 decapitator presets. Or do I want the lower order harmonic enhanced stuff from the Big Al, where I'm just throwing away all of the extra harmonics? I'm not interested in them. What this thing is doing, the circuitry that's running through this particular plugin is just lovely to my ears. It's gentle and subtle and pretty much exactly what I'm looking for. Okay, that turned into a bit of a saturator marathon. Hope you enjoyed it. Please hit like if you did. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and check out the Patreon and YouTube channel member links below if you'd like to support me. Thanks very much. I'll see you next time.